This presentation is on reading and how we can support our English language learners in that area. So the questions that we hope to answer by the end of this is, what is a balanced approach to literacy instruction? How does reading promote second language development? You could probably already guess the answer to that one. What does research tells us about effective reading instruction for English language learners? How can we use the Common Core state standards and the WIDA Consortium English language development standards to guide reading instruction for English language learners? How can an understanding of English language learners' reading strengths and needs inform a teacher's choices for instructional approaches, methods, and strategies? And how can teachers assess reading and use assessment results to guide further instruction? So we always want to have a balanced approach to any sort of instruction. And for literacy, here's some of the information that we have. The best approaches to teach reading have been the center of much debate. So some favor a holistic top-down approach, which recognizes reading as a highly complex process. And because of that, it favors instructional programs that begin by immersing students in authentic texts that become familiar, meaningful context to support direct reading instruction. There's a whole other camp that offers this bottom-up approach that argues that students first need to learn sounds and letters and use them to decode words, and then from there, sentences, before reading long extended works. So they favor instructional programs that use scripted reading to teach phonemic awareness and other discrete reading skills. So there's been a lot of debate and a lot of change in education over this for regular education students, regardless of English language learners, where there was a wave, a movement where we were focusing on phonics and teaching them this so that they had these little building blocks to then be able to decode larger, more complex texts. And then there are other approaches from there. Then that move phased out, and then we see that we were throwing students into larger, complex texts and hoping that we could, give them the support and they could start to make sense of all of that on their own. But we see that there's no always, and we've addressed this many times already in this class, there's no one way of addressing every student. And there are just these different camps that have different feelings. So that's where we stand on that. A balanced approach to literacy recognizes the need for some direct instruction in reading skills, but also emphasizes the importance of providing such instruction in meaningful context to make sure that students are able to comprehend and use what they read for authentic purposes. So how does reading then promote second language development? It's an excellent source of comprehensible input, and we'll be talking more about comprehensible input this week also. But this then enhances language development. Students have an unlimited number of opportunities to encounter written English. So unlike speaking, where there's limited access, unless you're forcing yourself, a student is forcing him or herself into that situation, or a teacher is mindfully doing that. With reading, we see that that's very different. They're surrounded by written text. English language learners have a much greater control over what they read as compared to what they hear. And correlation studies show that students who read more are faster and better readers, as well as better writers. And also students who read more have more practical knowledge. So none of that should be surprising, maybe the writing part, but we know already that reading is connected to other facets of language development. So we know that if they are submersing themselves in just more and more text, their reading will certainly improve, their frequency and understanding will improve. They will become better writers. We see that their own personal lexicon then develops, so they're gaining all this vocabulary. On top of that, grammatical skills, so they're becoming more and more aware of grammar and punctuation because they're really throwing themselves into more reading. So then that improves. And then obviously, if they're doing more reading, they're going to have more practical knowledge. That goes along with it. So there has been a study that found that ELLs who could read in their home language learned to read in English much faster than those who could not. And so this connects to what we've discussed previously in the class, and that's having that foundation in your home language and allows you to transfer a lot to your second language. So here's some of the research findings. Literacy instruction approaches for mainstream students are not sufficient for English language learners. So however we approach it for our regular, when our regular English speaking students are learning, that can't be the same approach we use for English language learners. English oral language development is critical for English literacy development beyond world level skills. Literacy instruction must be combined with high quality ESL instruction. And we know that as a content area teacher, you can't do this on your own. There needs to be an ESL teacher or an ELD teacher, however they're referring to it at your school, who's offering this this support in specifically language. Oral proficiency and literacy in the first language is an advantage for literacy development in English. Individual differences contribute significantly to English literacy development, so we know our students are unique and we need to keep that in mind. Most literacy assessments do a poor job of gauging English language learners' strengths and weaknesses. So home language experience can have a positive impact on literacy achievement, and effective literacy instruction for English language learners provides direct instruction in interactive learning environments. And we've mentioned the assessment piece before. There's no one assessment that does a really great job of doing this. So really it should be a combination of formative assessments in the classroom where you're kind of gauging that. So like anything else, there are these Common Core state standards that are aligned for reading. So they stress that reading proficiency, certain reading habits, and successful reading of specific types of text, which is unique to Common Core. They specifically outline informational and persuasive, are critical for college and career readiness. Common Core also emphasizes three major shifts in English language and literacy. So it's building knowledge through content-rich nonfiction, reading, writing, and speaking grounded in evidence from texts, both literary and informational, and then regular practice with complex text and its academic language. So how do we then kind of focus on this in the classroom? So Lau versus Nichols, if you remember, to a couple of weeks ago, is one of the very big court cases. It was one of the ones that specified specifically that just handing our English language learners the same materials as our English speaking students is not giving them the same education, right? There needs to be a special program for them so that they're learning the language and they can access that information. So we know we cannot teach ELLs to read the same way we teach proficient English speakers to read them. Teachers need to understand that English language learners' strengths and weaknesses, like anything else, we want to know our students' backgrounds and where they excel and where they need some work. English language learners need a balanced approach to literacy instruction that integrates reading, writing, listening, and speaking, teaches reading skills and strategies within the context of meaningful, authentic communication, and that is differentiated to meet the diverse language and literacy needs of the students in the class. Reading and learning does not take place just during English language arts time or ESL and English classes. And so this is always a point that I like to stress, just because we have English teachers in the building or a student has an ESL teacher that they work with doesn't mean that that's just the sole responsibility of those two individuals. Every content area has some sort of reading component. And so we really need to keep in mind that if a student has to engage in some sort of written text, then we need to be mindful of that as a content area teacher. So all teachers have a responsibility to help English language learners learn to read text associated with the content area that they teach. So reading is one of the primary means by which English language learners acquire new vocabulary words. Clearly, if they're really submersing themselves, they're going to start to build that vocabulary. It's important to provide direct vocabulary instruction for all unknown words, and this goes along with what we discussed with building background in the SIOP model. You want to be mindful, what text may I be asking the class to read for this lesson, and what vocabulary words are crucial for that text. Those are the ones that you probably want to address. Reading comprehension supports vocabulary development, and vocabulary development supports reading comprehension. So determining word meanings from context falls along a continuum of 4 categories. Misdirective context is seen to direct students to the wrong meaning of words. So anytime we're looking at context clues, they could fall under these 4 categories. And misdirective is when the clues that are provided are actually misleading. There's non-directive contexts that seem to be of no assistance in directing the students to any meaning. General context that seem to provide enough information so the student can place a word or have a basic understanding. And then there's directive context that seem to lead a student to a specific correct meaning. So there might be a rephrasing or a rewording right after the term. And so it's very clear then that this is what the word means. By understanding these contexts, teachers can analyze the text beforehand and determine which words require direct instruction. So this then helps us in building the background in our lessons. Identifying English language learners' reading levels can be challenging because ELLs enter the US schools at different ages, right? And then with different literacy in their home language, and then different levels of English understanding and language development. So frameworks used to identify reading levels in schools are designed mainly for students who already speak English and who are learning to read in the early elementary grades. For English language learners, these grade level correspondence may not be relevant because newcomer language learners arrive in the US schools at all grade levels, right? We could have a newcomer arrive in high school. So we haven't really found a great solution to this. The varying levels among English language learners makes it difficult to determine the levels of their English understanding. So the WIDA Consortium English Language Development Standards provided a useful tool for considering the language demands of specific reading tasks at different levels of English proficiency. So when we're selecting text and structuring activities, we have to keep some of these things in mind. Reading is a great source for comprehensible input for all that information we're providing them, and that promotes second language development. It's an important vehicle for content area learning, for understanding different content areas. Students should have access to a wide range of texts across content areas about different topics in different genres at different levels of complexity, so including authentic fiction, children and youth literature, and non-informational text, so a variety across the board. Reading is an important entry point for addressing goals of multicultural education, such as recognizing and valuing students' home cultures, helping students learn about other cultures, and preparing them to live and work in a diverse society. So if you're thinking about what we've discussed already with our English language learners and assimilation and acculturation and all of these things, if we already know the background to our students, and just like your cluster project, if you've already thought through all of those things you'd like to know about your English language learner, then you should have some background understanding in their culture or their traditions, and find ways, little ways, to include that into the class so that they also feel like they're seen and they're a member of that classroom. Teachers can use before, during, after structure to create activities around reading. So before, you want to activate prior knowledge. It could be a survey or a preview of a text, or even pre-teaching essential vocabulary. This is also where we get our jumpstart lessons. So if you want to pull a separate group aside, like in group of English language learners, and you preview the lesson for them. So you're providing them with like a snapshot of the lesson. So then when they're with the rest of the class and they're receiving the lesson, they already have some of that background information to draw on. During, you could model reading strategies, help students learn new vocabulary and make connections. And then after, teachers help readers consolidate, elaborate, and then deepen their understanding of the text. They could already discuss the connections they've made. Reading to, with, and by English language learners. So looking at reading in three forms: reading to, reading with, and reading by are all essential for English language learners. Read aloud is when the teacher reads aloud from a book or another text to students, and this is one of the most important things teachers can do to help English language learners learn. So the teachers should purposefully select words that are appropriate for grade level and proficiency level while they're completing a read aloud. And during read alouds, teachers can model how to think while reading. So what questions may you be asking while you're reading? So it's really a great way to model how we actively read a text. They can also gesture and make the text more comprehensible and engaging. So there are some suggestions for interactive read alouds and literature discussion. So increase the amount of time you read aloud and engage in extended discussion of the text. Stick to simple text that your students will be able to understand. So you would never, and this is just a best practice for all teaching, you never want to choose something that's so challenging that they can't access the information, and that's for all students. Choose text with illustrations that your students will enjoy and that will expand their understanding. When you read aloud, be sure that English language learners are not seated in the peripheral position, so in the side, along the sides or in the back. They should be able to see and hear the text. So if you can, have some sort of say in seating without, isolating students, you want them to be front and center. Give English language learners a preview of the text by holding a brief small group discussion with them before reading. So this is a great example of a jumpstart. This could be a jumpstart lesson down here where you're giving them a snapshot before. Shared reading is an example of reading with students and has many of the same features as read aloud. So shared reading provides teachers with opportunities to teach important concepts of print, demonstrate strategies that good readers use, and involve students as community of readers. Shared reading should be done with the whole group and can follow the same BDA structures as read aloud. So echo reading and choral reading provide scaffolding for English language learners and create a low risk environment so students can participate as they feel ready and their voices blend in with the other students so they're not feeling singled out or isolated in any sort of way. Guided reading is conducted with small groups of students. Typically, we try to keep it 3 to 6 students who are at the same reading level. So students have their own copies of the same text at that particular instructional level. And then for guided reading, we suggest that you select texts that have language structures, concepts, or vocabulary that will be within the reader's control. Meaning that with your support, they can still access information without it being too difficult or too challenging. Include as much practice as needed to help the students become more familiar with new language structures. During the introduction, use pictures, concrete objects, or demonstrations to help students understand the concepts, ideas in the book. Ask the students to identify words or phrases they cannot understand. This will help students monitor their own understanding. And include word work. 1 or 2 minutes of pre-planned emphasis on particular words will help students become familiar with how English works and learn many new high-frequency words and make connections to other words. There's also this language experience approach. So this is when a student identifies a problem in his or her life, tells a story about that problem, and then explores the solutions. Or it could just be a personal story. That's not a problem. We really just want the whole experience of sharing aloud is really what's important here. But the teacher writes down the story, and then the resulting text is used for reading instruction with that student. So essentially, they're creating the text that they're then using to practice reading, which is really kind of powerful if you think about it. The language experience approach can be varied to accommodate students at different English proficiency and literacy levels, and can be used for a variety of purposes. Independent reading is the end purpose of reading to and with students. So they can reach the point where they can read totally on their own independently. Younger students need approximately 10 to 15 minutes, and older students need 20 minutes or more. And independent reading can help develop students into lifelong readers. So really also during that independent reading, allowing them to read for just enjoyment really allows them to build that passion and that interest in it. Narrow reading is a form of independent recreational reading, and it entails reading several books on the same subject by the same author or in the same genre. So if you've ever done a literature review or a literature analysis, an author analysis, it's that similar idea, but at a much, much smaller level. Narrow reading can be an efficient way to acquire second language because it can maximize comprehensible input and can be very motivating. Reader's Workshop is another one, and it's offered as extended reading time in schools to promote reading. So once you're finished the reading, then what activities can be done to encourage that reading comprehension and the reading development? So there can be class discussions. The most simple activity, just engaging students in a whole group discussion or with smaller groups. And teachers can pose comprehension questions that they can answer in their groups or invite students to describe their favorite part of the story or to share their thoughts after reading. So it's very simple and very informal, it can be. There's also reader response, where teachers encourage students to reflect and extend their understandings of the text as they evolve. There's graphic organizers, and that helps students break down a text into essential components. So really, as you're thinking through these activities and considering them, you also want to keep in mind that whatever your purpose is, your objectives are for your lesson, these activities should align with that. There could be class-made books where students make pictorial representations of the text to demonstrate comprehension. This is really great if you have English language learners who are, in the early stages of their language acquisition. It's a great way for them to kind of engage with a text but not having to worry about that whole language component. You could have the students create alternative endings, or there could be a performed reading, a reader's theater, where then they perform the reading. So strategies for reading across the curriculum. So just like everything else, and we mentioned already in this presentation, right, all teachers are English language learner teachers. And so this can help in a lot of different content areas if you feel like the other activities are more geared toward English or language. So there could be note-making guides called making, not taking, to emphasize the active process of making meaning. And so Cornell Notes is one form of these kind of note guides that I've seen students use, but it could also be just a simple outline. Sometimes students don't know an outline format, and showing them the outline format and how they can go about outlining notes from a text, that could be really helpful. Word study or interactive vocabulary mini lessons, so a word web or a semantic map. We've talked a little bit about this already in an earlier presentation with building background, but a lot of these different activities geared around vocabulary could be really helpful. Reading digital text, so any text read online or on an electronic device would be a digital text. The advantages of that is that oftentimes these digital texts offer bilingual support, but students could also annotate on the digital text or record. They might have recording options so they could listen for parts of it too, which could be helpful. So then the last part here is assessing the reading. So to help English language learners improve, teachers must continually use formative assessments to monitor students' reading ability and progress. And we always want to gather a variety of formative assessments that we have as full a picture as possible. So concept of print checklists. These include understanding of differences between letters and words and spaces, knowing where to start reading and how to do a return to sweep to continue reading the next line. If you're at an elementary level, you'll be familiar with these types of checklists because you'll be gauging all of your students. And so this may be something that's more likely to be used at the elementary level. At the middle and high school level, your ESL teacher or ELD teacher they'll be doing their own assessments, but then they can provide you with some ideas or examples of how you can just be aware of it in your class and how you can gather information informally throughout class. And then that's something you would share and talk as a team so that you could understand, reading a little bit better for that student. There's also running records, which is an excellent tool for in-depth observation of a student's reading performance. A running record is a visual record of the student's reading word by word. While the student reads, teacher makes a series of specialized marks on the running record sheet, and those marks indicate each word that was read correctly, incorrectly, words that were inserted by the student, words that were omitted, that sort of thing. After completing a running record, the teacher asks comprehension questions or asks the students to retell the story to see if they did in fact understand it. So the number of words read correctly, total words minus the errors, is divided by the total number of words, and then this becomes the student's accuracy level. So books read at 90 to 94% accuracy are considered to be at the student's instructional level or within the zone of proximal development. This is very similar to those checklists I mentioned on the last slide, very specific to elementary. I personally have not seen this at the middle or high school in content area classes. This is something more that the ESL or EL teacher would be doing. But if you're planning to work in an elementary classroom, be mindful of this because this is something you might be doing anyway for all of your students, especially for your English language learners.